Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program, the 5th annual Fordham Reads Dante Lecture. It's great to see so many familiar faces here with us in Butler Commons and also so many familiar names on Zoom. So thank you all for joining us this evening. My name's Angela Alimo O'Donnell. I'm the Associate Director of the Curran Center for American Catholic Studies, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, distinguished Catholic sculptor Timothy Schmalz. Many of us are aware of the Fordham Reads Dante project. Some of you, in fact, have been participants. How many people have participated, gone to the Fordham Reads Dante meetings? Okay, wonderful. Those of you who have not gone yet, you're very welcome to come. For those who are not familiar with it, let me just say a few words about this extraordinary initiative. A number of years ago, the Curran Center spent 18 months reading the whole of Dante's Commedia with faculty and staff in our faculty seminar. Among our participants was Fordham's resident Dante scholar, who is now in the back of the room, Professor Susanna Barcella. Upon concluding our time together with Dante, Professor Barcella suggested that we join in partnership along with the Department of Modern Languages and the Medieval Studies program to create Fordham Reads Dante, an opportunity for members of the Fordham community and beyond to gather each month of the academic year to listen to the poetry of Dante read by a native Italian speaker, to hear a brief introduction to the canto of the day given by a faculty member or scholar, and to engage in discussion. This conversation began in the spring of 2016. With the exception of the COVID year, 2020, it has been going on ever since. As you can likely tell, we are in no hurry. We are proceeding at the luxuriously leisurely pace of one canto per meeting, enabling the group to consider carefully the artistry of the Commedia, to savor the music of Dante's language and lines, and to listen to better understand not only what the poem means, but how the poem means. Given this leisurely pace, and given the fact that the Commedia consists of 100 cantos, we will be at this for a while. After 5 years of gatherings, we have just completed the 22nd canto, if I'm not mistaken, of Inferno. So by my reckoning, we'll have another 78 cantos and another 13 years to go. But we are patient people. Dante was undaunted in his project of writing 14,233 lines of terza rima, so we shall follow his lead and be undaunted in the project of reading them. From the inception of the project, our focus has been on hearing Dante to recreate orally the original sound of the poem, for poetry is first and foremost linguistic music. In addition, we are interested in the ways in which Dante's work continues to speak to us here, now, in the 21st century. 700 years after Dante's death, he continues to be a persistent presence in the intellectual, religious, and artistic imagination of the Western world. Dante has influenced so many artists, from painters to poets to novelists and filmmakers, beginning in his own era and continuing into our own present moment. This brings us to our annual Dante Lecture, an event held in the early fall, which kicks off our new year of Fordham Reads Dante gatherings. This year's speaker brings us a fresh new way, not only of hearing Dante's poem, but of seeing Dante through powerful, original, three-dimensional figures cast in bronze. Canadian sculptor Timothy Schmalz has created the first sculptural interpretation of the entire Divine Comedy, the first one in 700 years. This ambitious project highlights equally the three parts of Dante's epic poem, the 100 cantos of the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. These individual sculptures interpret the poem in a way that highlights the central events of each canto, providing a perfect introduction to the poems for viewers new to the work. The reliefs are also appealing to the scholar, opening a new way of experiencing Dante. The Divine Comedy is filled with vivid imagery, which forms the inspirations for these new sculptures. Schmalz's Dante project creates a unique sculpture garden in a natural setting where one can enjoy Dante's epic poem. This, of course, makes it very special. Most people experience the Divine Comedy in the library or in the study, in private, whereas the Dante Gardens provide a physical outdoor environment where one can actually walk through hell and purgatory and heaven, taking the pilgrimage that imitates Dante's pilgrimage through those places, following Dante's path. Tonight, Timothy Schmalz will talk about the journey, as well as his own journey in the creation of this extraordinary project. In addition, Mr. Schmalz's own journey as an artist is an extraordinary one. For more than 30 years, he has been visually translating sacred scripture and bringing forth spiritual artwork that presents authentic representations. After leaving art school at 19, Schmalz lived in his small studio in Toronto. As he writes, quote, "I had no heat in my first old studios, no washrooms, and just a simple board to sleep on. For years, I lived like that. It was during this time that I stripped myself of all distractions and material concerns. I did art for art's sake. And through an amazing journey, I realized that in order to have a great work of art, I needed epic subject matter." Epic subject matter is precisely what Schmalz has chosen in his Dante project. He also chooses to depict issues that loom large in the modern consciousness, particularly issues of justice and social concern. In 2013, he created the very moving sculpture, Homeless Jesus. Numerous editions of this work have been installed in some of the most historically significant Christian sites in the world, including the entrance to Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee and in the Vatican. In 2019, his epic sculpture, Angels Unawares, which depicts the drama of immigration, was installed in St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis stated that he commissioned the 20-foot bronze sculpture and installed it in the center of the Catholic world for it to become a reminder of the evangelical challenge of hospitality. To quote the scripture that the sculpture references, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Most recently, Mr. Schmalz has completed a monumental sculpture depicting the age-old sin of slavery and human trafficking, one that continues to haunt us in our current moment. The large-scale sculpture will be installed in Rome, and smaller-scale versions will appear in other significant venues, including right here in New York City's own St. Patrick's Cathedral, to be unveiled on the Feast of St. Patrick this coming spring. So if you go to the parade, as all of you should, make sure you stop up at St. Patrick's to see the new sculpture. Timothy Schmalz is not only Pope Francis's favorite sculptor, he is a Catholic artist who possesses the rare gift of imaginative vision, the blessing of talent, and the discipline of craftsmanship. He also possesses the great gift of faith. When those of us who are engaged in Catholic studies talk about the phenomenon of the Catholic imagination, I can't imagine a more fitting embodiment of that ideal than Timothy Schmalz. We're very fortunate to have him with us this evening, so please join me in welcoming him to Fordham.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to accept here. Well, thank you very much. And what I am going to present is really a journey. The highlight of tonight will be Dante, but how I got there, I think, is very important. And why Dante and why now will be hopefully revealed through visuals here. Why not? This is sculpture. So I'm just going to give you kind of a visual biography of myself at the point where I started the Dante. So let me see if I can get this working here. Oh, wait, can I see the pictures? Can you see them? I can't see. Where do I go here? Share screen. Okay. What? Okay, there we are. Oh, I double click on it. Oh, there. Can you see it, everyone? Okay. So that's me at the age of 20 years old. And that's my studio that was mentioned, where I was literally sleeping on a board, waking up every morning and sculpting. Before this photo was taken, I already fell in love with Dante, and I didn't even know it. My favorite sculpture at the age of 17 was Rodin's The Thinker. Are you familiar with that sculpture of the thinking? It's a universal sculpture that symbolizes human thought. But initially it was called The Poet. And Rodin actually created it as a sculpture of Dante. And so what I really loved about that piece is just his rawness, the humanity of it. Little did I know, years later, I would actually be sculpting my own interpretation of Dante. But at the beginning age here, I realized that, let me see, I can, is there a next button here? That X? Okay. Yeah. The what? No, the arrows aren't working either, no. Okay. There it is. So at the beginning of my career, I started to find fascination with religious sculpture. And what I loved about it was that, in a sense, it was functional. It was actually creating something that would be used for people's prayer. But what I also liked about it was it had some purity about it. It had some joy and happiness. When I went to art school, I found that a lot of the artwork that was presented was artwork that was all about the horror of life, like like you look at our culture with Van Gogh, he cut off his ear, and you look at the modern artwork, and so much of it is talking about human misery, and nothing really addressed the happiness and the joy of life. I found that within the Christian art, and then I started doing it myself. And I felt that it was really, really radical for me at the age of 19, 20, 21 to be doing Christian artwork, where that seemed to be probably one of the few tabooed subjects that artists would actually embrace. And a lot of people were so turned off against Christian artwork that I came across that they wouldn't even call what I was doing art. Well, how dare them? So I continued, and that just gave me more passion and more drive to continue to do what I would consider amazing artwork. And one of the peaks of my life right now is a sculpture that you can see here of a Holy Family. The bigger one is in Bethlehem, and the original model was given to Pope John Paul II when actually the year before he passed away, which was really meaningful for me. And at that point, I found that artwork, new artwork, is needed. It's needed to kind of rejuvenate our faith and our society. It's almost like if you have a coin that's been used so much, the relief of the coin kind of gets worn down. By having new art being put into the world today, kind of sharpens it and people can see it again. And I started becoming very concerned with using form, using design to actually create a mood. You can see this sculpture here. It's a Madonna and Child, but it also looks like a seashell. It's so organic and so soft. It kind of sucks you in. And I realized that there's a relationship between what is being represented and how it's being represented. This is a very soft piece. When you come up to it, you feel that warmth, you feel that love between the mother and child. So at this age, I was really developing, in a sense, a library of different tools and different things I can use to create different sculptures. Deeply, though, it affected me that people did not think that Christian artwork was real artwork. So I spent the period of time doing these epic monuments in the public commissions. This one here you can see was a pinnacle point in my life when I realized I was not afraid of sculpture. And so you can see here, this is a national mining monument for Canada, and it has 1,000 miners in it. But what I was a little bit upset about after spending so much time working on this was the subject. And I thought, although it was pretty cool, I thought, there's another one that's really complex, but I thought, wouldn't it be great to have the same energy put to something that is more universal, that's more spiritual? So I created this sculpture, which is a sculpture with 140 saints surrounding a representation of Christ. And if you see at the top there, it's a kind of a rose suggested by angels. And I thought, how do I represent heaven here? And then so I thought about Dante, and I thought about how he represented it. And so even this piece, I think I did this piece like 25 years ago. You can see Dante is like seeping into my artwork. And I think all artists kind of get affected, have that influence, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I don't necessarily think I was very much aware of that is so Dante paradise when I was actually doing it. But there it is. But I continue to do larger sculptures, as you can see here, a huge crucifixion. And with all of my pieces, I take a lot of care in what I do. So I'll have a model that will be posing. That's my model, Ed. And he would be posing for hours as I'm sculpting. And I'm not actually 100% concerned about getting it to be 100% lifelike. I'm not really interested in a body cast or a wax museum stuff, but to have models in front of me actually helps my experience. And and that's a finished piece there. It's pretty cool in wood. One of the few wood pieces I've done. And there's, I'm jumping ahead here, but I want to get to Dante. But here's another piece I did. And this is an African Jesus on a cross. And after countless years of creating Christian artwork, I felt there was another challenge, and that is to try to get representations that fit, that people can see, that represent authentically Christianity, our faith. And we were just talking about this earlier, about the power of artwork and how artwork is basically a way to see something, subject matter, and as authentic as I can possibly represent that subject matter, the better the piece is. The greatest piece is one that the art, in a sense, disappears, and all you see is what you're sculpting. Like, for instance, St. Ignatius. If I do a sculpture of St. Ignatius, I would want to do it that when people see it, they say, oh, look, that's St. Ignatius. And it wouldn't say, oh, that's Tim Schmalz doing a sculpture of St. Ignatius. So what I really began to feel is that if I can be as thin as possible in my artwork and the subject as big as possible, then I've been a successful artist, and it's a successful piece. So here is a typical example of one of my experiments where I think, why does Jesus always necessarily have to be represented as a European? That's our tradition, because a lot of the great masters were European, 500 years ago. But nowadays, with a culture that is globalized, we have to have representations. We have to have new faces, as well as the old ones, in this collection of artwork. And so I was very challenged about doing many representations, and that's what drew me to looking at the scriptures and visually translating the scriptures. And this is a piece that was mentioned in the introduction, the homeless Jesus sculpture. And this was, again, another turning point with my artwork, where I took the idea of scripture and I asked myself, how would Jesus want to be represented? I remember there's this kind of the buzz that was going on years ago is, what would Jesus do within this circumstance? Well, being a sculptor, I thought, how would Jesus sculpt himself? And he wouldn't really be concerned about the chiseled abs. He'd be concerned about representing himself as he represented himself in the text, in the Bible. So here's a representation of Jesus as a homeless person from Matthew 25, where there is that ambiguity. There is that, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? And then there's this eureka moment where it's unfolded like theater, where whenever you've helped the least in our culture, you've helped me. So that's a direct representation, or a direct sign about how Jesus wants to be represented. So this sculpture is in many cities. This is a really cool photo in the center of Glasgow, Scotland, at the Episcopal Church, the Tron Church. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about artwork is it's physical. How many times have people read a set part of the scripture and then they leave, and then they go out into the normal day-to-day life. And then they think that that scripture is in a book and it's this thick, or it's in a church. But when you use visual artwork, what you can do is you can bring that message out in a place that you're not used to seeing it. And so I did a series of these pieces that went around the world. Some places, when it came installed, they even celebrated. This cake is from Johannesburg. When it went to Johannesburg, they had a massive celebration and had a kind of a birthday for the homeless Jesus sculpture. This is the piece in Capernaum. And what it really gave me also the understanding, this piece that's in many different places, is this is actually in New York City. That's at St. John the Divine Cathedral. Yeah, I took that photo. That's the most Gothic photo I ever took. But anyway, to see the power of how sculpture can bring to light text and bring it out into the open, into the daylight, and have people interact with it in a different way, really intrigued me. And to see it happening was really phenomenal. That's in Washington, D.C. And so after I created many different Matthew 25 sculptures, this one's in Rome, another one in Rome, that's in Detroit, I began to realize that artwork is an amazing tool to celebrate, to promote, and educate. And this is an awesome sculpture, St. Padre Pio. This is at the old St. Patrick's Church in New York City. And this is another cool thing about artwork. This one here, this is a little bit off topic, but this is a sculpture of St. Padre Pio, who happens to be my favorite saint. And he's at a confessional. And so when you come up to the confessional, you can sit down like I am there sculpting, and you're looking through the window thinking that you're going to just see Padre Pio, the saint, with his gloved hand reaching out towards you. But you see the face of Christ and the exposed hand of Christ coming up. And this idea just dropped in my heart from heaven, and just like, wow, I was as shocked as other people when they experienced the piece. And what it did prove to me, or it taught me, there it is at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. And there it is in Limerick, Ireland. But what it did teach to me is that artwork nowadays has to be tough, and it has to be shocking in a sense that people can see it. We have so much inundation within our culture that you just can't do some little nice sculpture, St. Padre Pio praying. No one will be intrigued by that saint. Something has to really be exciting for people to actually see it. And if my premise, or if my goal as a sculptor is to promote Christianity and the values and the heritage, then I better do something super special, or I might as well not do anything at all. And so it was a series of pieces like this that led to one of my biggest projects in my life to this point. I'm like 49 when I did this piece here. I think I was 48 when I was working on it there. But the Vatican asked me to create a sculpture on the theme of refugees. And I said, okay. And so I went back to my studio, and the idea of scripture came back to me. It's always text that came back to me. It was almost like it was the anchor. And the text on this piece was Hebrews 13:2. Be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. I envisioned in my studio more than 100 different refugees and immigrants from all historical periods, from all regions of the world, on one raft, on one boat. And in the center would be an angel. But because of the crowd, you couldn't see the angel, but for the wings. Can you see the wings up there? And so it's so discreet. And it's like that passage is very discreet. It's very authentic to that passage. Be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. It's poetic. It's beautiful. And the sculpture actually tries its best to be, even though it's like a 20-foot, 3.5-ton monument, it tries to be discreet in that message. And so people can come up to it and they can see the faces, they can see the crowd. They can't see anything but the angel's wings. They begin to understand slowly that the angel's wings represent, in a sense, the spirituality of them all. And so it's a very discreet way of representing of one of the most beautiful passages of the Bible. And so it was during this period of time that after this sculpture was installed, that I was asked by the Vatican to create another piece on the theme of human trafficking. And this is a piece that this cast is going to the hometown of Saint Paquita, who's actually the woman letting the oppressed go free, the name of the title. And so she was a slave from a previous century, and she's opening up the ground. And all these human trafficked people, you have child soldiers, you have prostitutes, you have child brides, you have forced labor. They're all being freed by Saint Paquita. And so this sculpture here is the one that was mentioned that is going to be in a smaller version installed in St. Patrick's Cathedral at St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick was human trafficked himself. He was a slave. And so they're going to be using that special day, St. Patrick's, to remind people that slavery still exists today. But it was after this piece, and it was a lot of work to do it, that I decided that, well, what do you do after you create the Angels Unaware sculpture, a sculpture about human trafficking? What should I do with my time? And then I thought about Dante, and I thought about how our culture really needs Dante today. We need to have more celebration for such an amazing poet. And as you can see here, can you see that? It's not a very good photo. That's the Dante sculpture in the Dante Park in New York City. And oftentimes when in historically in the past, and this one was installed almost to the I think 101 years ago at the 600th anniversary of Dante. This piece was put in New York. And what I look about this piece, I'm happy that there's a Dante Park. I'm happy that there's a sculpture of Dante in New York. However, it was a different sensibility back then. You could put a robed person on a big pedestal and people would look at it. They would go up and, oh, wow, Dante and everything like that. But I think now, like I said, artists have to work harder to get the attention to people. We have so many different competitions right now. In fact, I was right there a couple of years ago, standing at close to the foot of that pedestal. And I was asking people, who is that? Who is that? Just passerbys in New York. And they're like, I don't know. And every time someone would say, I don't know, not one person, I must have asked around 12 people before I gave up, and not one person identified it as, oh, that's Dante. And it really upset me. And I thought, if I want to do something of Dante, it has to be educational and it has to get excitement going. It cannot just be a head on a stick. And so this is, if you can see here, this is the Gates of Hell. I'm not sure if how many of you are familiar with this, but this is Rodin's sculpture. And if you can see at the top there, well, in the center top is the thinker, and that was the poet. And then you have the Gates of Hell, the Inferno represented. All of those different figures are inspired by Dante's Inferno, and it's called the Gates of Hell. And it took him 10 years to do it. And this sculpture for, I think, 20 years or more has been really upsetting me. Not because I don't think it's beautiful. I think it's awesome. It's huge, but it's the gates of hell. What about the gates of purgatory or the gates of paradise? And I thought, isn't that it? There's such an emphasis on Dante with the Inferno. You go to Florence and you'll see the Inferno pizza parlor, right? You go anywhere and it's all about the Inferno. And what I really thought about was about how that distorts the Divine Comedy. It absolutely distorts it. It was done in 3 canticas and basically balanced with the same in each. I think Inferno has an extra canto, right? But essentially it was meant as 3 parts. And our culture always focuses on the first one. And so I thought, if I am going to work on the Divine Comedy, I'm going to have to give equal parts to each. And that's, in a sense, being authentic to Dante. Just like I was trying my best to be authentic to Matthew 25, representing Jesus as a homeless person. I don't think you can read Dante and stop at the Inferno like so many people do. You don't get his message. And so when I decided that I wanted to do a big project, it was doing all of the Divine Comedy. And I thought, I'm not just going to stop at the Inferno. I'm going to have to do it all, right? And so right now, I'm just going to, this is the first canto. And what I'm going to do is this is a small reproduction. This is an actual little reproduction of the piece. I'm going to pass this around so you guys can just look at it. The bigger one has a lot more detail, but I'm just going to, you guys can, I'm also going to include pass around these books too, because I'm not going to hit on every single every single canto, but you can page through those as I talk. And what I wanted to do when I decided to work on the Divine Comedy is I wanted to have it as kind of an experience for me. And I'm guilty of reading probably more Inferno than Paradise or Purgatory. And I thought this will be a practice for me. This will be a prayer for me in a sense. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to have basically a clean slate too, which I basically had at that point in time because my knowledge of each canto was pretty simple at that point. And I wanted to take Dante's art and then put it in my spirit, my head, my heart, and see what type of artwork would come out of that. And so I wanted to kind of be, in a sense, authentic to my normal or general inspiration for what I got from each of the cantos, right? This one I love. The pattern is gorgeous. I wanted to, on each of these also, to create a design. As the project continued, I never really thought I would be at the point of a week before the 700th anniversary of Dante to be presenting the first canto to Pope Francis a week before the 700th anniversary, which was an amazing time for Dante. Pope Francis is a lover of Dante, and he's made it very clear that we all should read more Dante. And so it was a wonderful time the week before his 700th anniversary to be there in Rome and presenting the first canto. This is the portrait of Dante that I created with some of the cantos in the back. I'll get to that later. But each one of these cantos for me, I was not only concerned about me having fun doing them, because I thought if I'm going to be, oh my God, I got to do canto 52, it's going to be reflected in the artwork. So I had to be in that right mind space. So this is, I kid you not, this is what my period of Dante was. At nighttime, I would read the canto that I was about to start in the next morning. I would read it over and over, and then I would do very simple sketches of what came from reading that. How did that move me? What was the imagery that stuck out for me? And then what I would do, and this is kind of sneaky, but then I would Google and see what other artists did with that specific canto. And I think, oh, isn't this interesting? I got an advantage because I can see what they did and they can't see what I did. And, and so this is really interesting. I understood some of the pitfalls too, and some of the struggles with some of the cantos that some of the artists had. Botticelli, for instance, I noticed some problems with his work where there's a lot of cantos that if you just basically literally interpret them, what's going on in that canto, you will just have two heads talking. And that doesn't make for exciting artwork. So a lot of the cantos that I started to do, I penetrated to sculpting what they're talking about. And this is really interesting. An example of that where someone is dead, but a devil has taken their place up in the world, where he's drinking, he's putting on his clothes and everything like that, right? To take the idea of Dante and bring it forth to the idea where it's just not two heads talking, that it's just not an absolute visual interpretation of what's in front was necessary, because only does it become exciting visually when you have much more deeper involved within it, right? And so this is a scope. Let's get back to the beginning though. I wanted to do a portrait of Dante holding the first canto, and that's a life-size sculpture of Dante. And this is at the University of Cambridge in the UK. A beautiful park. And look at what I find fascinating about the installation of this is the relief sculpture that I'm passing around there, canto number 1, Dante's in Wilderness, and they put the Dante here within this background. That's so appropriate for canto 1. But what I didn't want to do also is have the Dante like he's just getting his picture taken, or he's just going to be awarded a medal. He should be awarded a medal, but I wanted him in exile. I wanted him crouched down. I wanted him writing. And so here's a very raw portrait of Dante. We do have his death mask. If you go to Florence, you can see generally how he looked. Very strong, really interesting features. So I put a little bit of that within it, but it's a man in exile that I wanted to represent here. In each of the cantos, I would do a simple sketch, and I would also be very concerned about keeping the interest up. When you're dealing with 100 cantos, I didn't necessarily want them to look the same in any way. When you're in Inferno, you could do a lot of flames and you could do a lot of demons, but whenever there was an opportunity to bring something else, like what they're talking about, I would go for it. I would run for it. And as I started to work on the project, I began to believe that this is an amazing tool for people to be introduced to Dante. And if the artwork, oh, just wait here. Maybe I can close that. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But if artwork can excite other people to pick up a book of Dante and read it, then it's done a good job. It's done what it had to do. And so I thought, if I can excite people and create something that people will be curious about, there's no way you can sculpt everything in each canto. It would be insane. You would need 5 lifetimes to do it. But so I wanted to do was just, in a sense, to bring a teaser to people for Dante. This is the piece in Florence. And yeah, so it's this is St. Lawrence on the Grill. And I also wanted, when I could, and when you get into purgatory and when you get into paradise, you really do realize how religious the book is and how spiritual it is. If you just stay in the Inferno, you're not going to really have that understanding that it is a book that is celebrating God. And so the idea of bringing in more representations and the full Divine Comedy within one sculptural park is really going to have that emphasis. They oftentimes say that in universities, and people that read Dante, they'll stop at the Inferno. But if I create a park that you go this pathway, you start in the Inferno, Purgatory, Paradise, and I make it that it's like a one-way street that people can't leave after they're done Inferno. They'll have to go through the rest. They'll be amazed at how cool it is. Because the fascinating thing is, I really do think that the Divine Comedy only gets interesting when you're in Purgatory. And that's when it becomes, oh my God, this is absolutely amazing. And to experience that, I've experienced it with the year I created the sculptures. And I think other people will experience that when they actually get the text. Ideally, the Dante parks that I make will have benches, and people can bring their copy of the Divine Comedy and enjoy reading outside. And it's, in a sense, it's true, because Dante, it's a journey, it's a pathway, it's something that you can do with your feet. And here, with this project, you can also do it with your eyes. And that's Dante looking at Beatrice's eye and seeing himself in the reflection there, as you can see, as well as the angels. But yeah, so it was an amazing experience. After I got done most of them, when I got to Paradise, actually, when I got done Inferno, I realized that it's never been done before, that no one has ever sculpted every single canto. William Blake, he didn't finish it, but he did some absolutely amazing artwork that really influenced me. And you think about the time he did it, it's just astonishing, right? The fascinating thing is, when I was right involved in it, I was saying, oh my God, I can't believe why no one has ever in 700 years represented all of the Divine Comedy. And I think that the answer is with the sculpture in the Dante Park, where when someone would want to do a representation of Dante, it would just be up straight, maybe holding a book like this. And that is how a century ago they thought about how a sculpture to honor Dante would look. And like I mentioned, that the problem is right now is, although people know how to read and write, they're becoming illiterate. And I believe that the reason why that is because of lack of time. And we have too much out there to fight with. Too many people asking for your time, Facebook, whatever, TikTok, they're all wanting you to be pulled into their camps. And so when you create a sculpture park where you can bring the ideas of Dante out to create that curiosity and excite people to read, I think that that's a good use of artwork. And so that's essentially my project. It was an amazing experience. As you can see here, I'd usually do 6 at a time. And it's hard to know when you're finished a sculpture. And basically, I felt with each one, after I hit a point, it was time to move on. Again, I have within it a variety. I was almost like, I felt like a Hollywood director. I would read this canto and I'd say, that would be exciting. And then so I'd bring that out. And then I would say, okay, I got too many Virgils now. I got to get away from Virgil. I have to do something else here, right? And so I'd always be trying to make it visually interesting. Each different piece I would create as a design, like that Madonna and Child that has a swirl. You can see even on that piece that I'm doing there, there's a flow going on. And so I wanted to not only to make the pieces authentic to the text, pull some specific aspect out of the text that if you really knew Dante, you would get it. But if you didn't, it doesn't matter. And I wanted to actually, if you never read the Divine Comedy, have something interesting to see and have something that would compel you to read Dante, right? And so the cool thing is that the casting of them, I do them in clay first, and then they're cast in bronze, very similar to that small sculpture that I was passing around, except much bigger. The interesting thing is that the configuration of them can be so cool. This is the architectural drawing of the Dante part in Toronto. I hope you can see that. The white figure in the center is where Dante's playing. And instead of having them, you start out with the Inferno, they're having it from the center Dante. You go to the one cantica of the Inferno, then behind you have Purgatory, and then Paradise here. So you can read them as clusters on each giving equal, almost like a triangle around a circle that centers that portrait of Dante. So the cool thing about 100 sculptures is you can really do nice play with them and create a beautiful environment for them. And so I think in conclusion, if I could take, which I did do, I took my year of the pandemic and I created something to honor someone that I do believe warrants more awareness and praise within our society. And so, and also hopefully create that inspiration for people to read the greatest poet that ever lived. And now I'm working on new projects.
Grab one of these mics. Let's see which one's okay, great. Beautiful, beautiful talk, Tim, and absolutely stunning images. And it's so wonderful to have one that we can actually hold and pass around. I'm sorry for the people on Zoom that you're not here to be able to hold the sculpture. But Tim has kindly agreed to take any questions that you might have. I have a lot of them, but I'll restrain myself and let other people ask them instead. And I just ask you to raise your hand and then I'll give you the mic so that the folks on Zoom can hear your question also. So any questions? Comments, remarks, observations? Oh, and if you could just introduce yourself also.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I am a master's student in the Medieval Studies department here at Fordham. And I'm just curious what drew you to sculpture in the first place as your primary medium?
Well, I've always loved the permanence of sculpture. I think when I was a young boy, I really suffered from the idea of things being unsubstantial. I hated it. I was like having this existential crisis when I was younger about, is this a dream? How can I prove it's not a dream? And I think with sculpture, what I loved about it and what I still do love about it is the permanence of it. And especially a material like bronze that's what I do. And it lasts infinitely. And I think that is the blessing of it. And it's also the haunting element about it as being a sculptor, because whatever you do is there forever. So if you make a mistake, it's going to be there forever. And so, but I loved the fact that more mature now, I love the fact that people are visual. And if I can take the project like the Divine Comedy and turn it to bronze and put it in a park, a physical place, it kind of is a great honor to that poet. And it's like, if you think about it, like you can get an honorary degree, you can have a lot of accomplishments in one's life, but if someone makes a sculpture of you and puts it in a park, that is like almost the highest compliment one can get. And so I thought about Dante, and I thought about the idea of doing a portrait of him with his gift that he gave us surrounding him. And I thought, 700 years. I thought, man, he must, if he's in heaven, he must be really, really happy about that in 700 years that this is happening. And for me as a sculptor and as a Catholic sculptor, principally, I'm really amazed at how it's relevant today. And I was sculpting it throughout the pandemic. And it was interesting because I started working every morning at 4 a.m. in the dark. And a fascinating ritual that I had is I would, at nighttime, read the text I would go on the internet. There's a lot of great people talking about Dante. So I'd take that canto and I would see what other people have said about it. Look at what other artists have done. Gustave Doré, amazing. I don't know if you know Gustave Doré. Have you seen any of his illustrations? Oh my God. I wish I had some. But at 4 a.m, I'd get to my studio and I would put a tape on CDs of Dante, unabridged, that section I'm working on. And 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I would do it like for 5 hours and then I'd do my other sculptures, but I would have it on repeat. So I was in it. Right? And the fascinating thing is this is all during the pandemic. And when I left at 9 o'clock, because I'd stop at 9 to do my other projects, I felt in such a good mood. And even when I was in hell, I felt I was so happy. And I thought, why am I so happy? There's a pandemic going on outside. I'm sculpting Dante's hell, and it's putting me in a good mood. And I think that the really interesting thing about Dante is that there's structure. There's so much structure. And in this world today, there isn't that Dante structure. We're in a state of nihilism. And when you have this area in hell for these people being punished, this area of purgatory, and this, it's all, I think, something that humanity needs. They need to have that architecture to live. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about Dante is he really gives you that breath of fresh air of just having order in the world. Whereas we're surrounded by a culture that wants to destroy everything. And so 700 years later, here we are. And Dante, I think, is one of the greatest healers for us today. So why do I do sculpture? Because it's the greatest way of honoring what warrants to be honored, what deserves to be honored. And that's the key thing. Yeah.
There were a couple of other people with hands up.
Hello, I'm Anastasia. I'm an undergrad here at Fordham, minoring in Italian. And this is probably like not as good as a question as the one you asked, but how long does it take you to sculpt like that really big piece? About how long?
Oh, the refugee piece, that one, there's 140 different figures in it. And it took me nonstop 7 months. And that would be, again, waking up really early and then sculpting. I wasn't doing the Dante at that point in time. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do both of those projects. And likewise with the human trafficking piece, just probably around 7 or 8 months. And that's shutting down really everything. And so, yeah, so being a sculptor, intense. You really have to find something that's worth spending that much intensity on, or you would lose it. You just say like the minor project, that big, I was just like, okay, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. Or like, I can't do public pieces that are not trying to get to the essence of it, or I don't have my energy. Right. And so if I'm looking at scripture, or, I'd say Dante should be a saint. But that's as close to the Bible as possible when you're sculpting that, and it brings you in a peaceful state. It's meditation, reading it, sculpting it. I think so. Yeah.
Would you pass this back to Patricia?
Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm also an undergrad. I was just wondering, do you have like a favorite sculptor of yours, like sculpture that you have done throughout your career?
I'd say my favorite. I'd say the two that I showed you would be the Angels Unawares piece in St. Peter's Square, and also the Homeless Jesus. I think probably, I'm sorry to say this, but probably the Homeless Jesus is, I think, more a favorite than the Angels Unawares. And I think that the reason is because it's really impacted people, and unbelievably. So people have come up to me at a dedication in one city and talked about how they were converted when they saw my homeless Jesus at another place, right? Also, I think that it's kind of a home run when it comes to dealing with what Jesus wants us to think about. And so that would be my favorite piece.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alessandra Carino, and my question is, while you were doing the Dante project, was there anything that was surprising or especially transformative that you didn't expect while you were doing it?
Probably that I got it finished. No, I every bit of it. Like what one of the things, like there's 100 cantos, and so I can't really pinpoint one specific experience of this, but there are so many little delights in that text, in that poem, that it's just like he's talking to me, right? And I think when you get into it, it's just like it's so fresh, and I'm thinking, how can this be so real right now? And it's because it's eternal. Great artwork like the Divine Comedy is eternal, and it taps into us, right? And so I think also the surprise was how excited I was with Purgatory and Paradise, and how that kind of, if you look at the sculptures, you'll probably find them more interesting than the Inferno. I really do, and I think that that's reflective on the poetry. I think the best parts are the parts, unfortunately, that people don't read as much as they should.
My name is Katie Tweedle. I'm in the master's program at the Center for Medieval Studies. You talked about Christian artwork as being functional, serving a purpose. It's useful in a way, it helps people pray. I'm wondering if you have any other examples of Christian artwork that does that.
Well, I think that if you look at, I think if you look at most of the Christian artwork that was done more than 100 years ago, that the artists were praying and were really prayerful when they did it. So I would say if you go to Europe, you would have almost every single cathedral you walk into, there would be that heart, soul that was working with their hands to create that. And like, for instance, and this is what our secular culture doesn't talk about, that Michelangelo was so hardcore Catholic. But you'll talk about everything about Michelangelo except for that, at least a lot of the secular people would. That Rodin, who did The Thinker, before he completely committed to being a sculptor, he wanted to be a priest. And you look at his artwork, even though a lot of people would look at The Thinker and not make the connection to Dante and look at a lot of his stuff, but there's a lot of spirituality, religion embedded within that. So I think that the great artwork of the past was that prayer, that visual prayer, just like what I'm trying to do with my artwork. And if you look at the cathedrals too, one of the things that really touched me when I was in my early 20s is realizing that these guys were building this without ever the hope of seeing it finished. And if you go to some of the great cathedrals in Europe, there's no way a culture that did not really believe in God could have done that. That was not only the artist's prayer, but that was the whole society, I think. And so, yeah, I think that the real home of artwork, and I do believe that it's not only sculpture, but it's other than fine artwork, is spirituality. And there is such a deep connection there. But oftentimes in our culture, that's ignored or overlooked.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Gabby. I'm undergrad here. I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier saying that creating Christian art, people didn't really view it as art. When you expanded your representation in your art, including other cultures and races, did you receive any backlash or criticism? Just because I know whiteness, the perspective of whiteness intersected with Christianity is incredibly deep rooted in our society.
Yeah, there's several times that I got backlash for my sculptures. And I understand what you're saying. And I do believe that, well, let me put it this way. I'm fighting always two people. I'm fighting the atheists, and I'm also fighting the certain group of religious people that don't want the artwork to be a bridge or an open hand. They want it to be a back off. And it's really interesting how artwork has I think in the Catholic Church, a lot of it has been, this is our club and you're not welcome, because it's so unapproachable, some of it. And it's like, and then they get very defensive if you want to change that. If you want to change the way Mary looks, or if you want to change the way Jesus looks, they're like, don't touch our statues, right? Don't change them. Where I come from, the perspective is that it's another way of evangelizing. And we have to have Jesus represented how he would want to be represented. But you know, you look at the tradition of artwork, like go to Rome, for instance, right? It wasn't a global society. They were trying to make Jesus and the biblical scenes very human by putting them in contemporary dress. That's what they were doing in some of their art pieces. And they wanted to bring people in, but it was a very small world as opposed to now. And it's interesting because that African corpus that I did went to Tanzania. And I remember talking to the Capuchin there, and he said, you know what? Here in Africa, we find it very difficult to find an African Jesus, because even in Africa, most of the representations of Jesus that they can find are white, right? And I look at myself, my background is German. If I went into all the churches and all I saw were Korean looking Jesus, Korean looking Mary, I wouldn't feel that that is as much a welcoming thing to me. And so I think that what the Catholic Church has to do is they have to have a plethora of different representations of Jesus. So if, you know, I have yet to do an Asian Jesus, but I want to, I very much want to. And because that's a blind spot. And you know, the fascinating thing with Christian artwork is there are so many blind spots, because it's like it was predominantly seated in Europe, you know, 200 years ago. And so that's what became the tradition of representing 200-year-old European looking sculptures of Jesus. In order for it just not to be an ornament or some historical relic from the past, Christianity or the artwork has to kind of pick it up and bring it up. And that's why I think the homeless Jesus is so popular to the Episcopals and the Anglicans, because it's at St. John the Divine Cathedral. That's an Episcopal cathedral. They love it. And so it's kind of like, if artwork is more authentic and relevant today, the Protestants will like it, and secular people like it. I have so many people that came up to me and said the best comment ever was, I'm not religious, but I really do like that sculpture. Well, then you really do like what Christianity is presenting, but it's just rarely presented. And likewise with Dante, a lot of people are so intimidated by Dante. They're so intimidated. And so, well, are you intimidated? Go for a walk in a park. Why not? And yeah, okay, I'll go for a walk in the park, and then go to purgatory. Come on. But it'll warm people up. And it's interesting because, you know, the Angels Unawares, the big sculpture in St. Peter's Square, the Undersecretary of Pope Francis, Cardinal Czerny, who's actually a Jesuit, after the piece was installed, he said, I want to put a QR code near the sculpture. And I'm like, you what? He said, a QR code. And I fought him on it for like weeks on end. And then I realized who I was. I was an artist, and he's the cardinal who actually works with Pope Francis. So I said, okay, I'll draw out where the QR code should be. And so we put that on the sculpture. And the last time I was in Rome, I saw every second people clicking on that QR code. Where did that QR code lead to? It led to the Vatican Department of Migrants and Refugees. And everyone that, and I kid you not, every second, people are leaving with the Vatican Refugees website. And I thought, my God, I got to do that with the Dante parks, where you come over and then you click on this, and oh my God, you're now on Dante. And now you can scroll and see a couple of the images and get a brief idea about Dante, and you take that with you on your phone. And the cool thing is that that is going to promote Dante more than an ad or a billboard would, likewise. And so I think that artwork has to be relevant today. And I think that that it will bring more people to that subject matter. And that's the premise of it. Artwork it has to be an invitation.
Maybe I can be heard even without the mic. I'm used to. I noticed that the sculptures that you have for the 100 sculptures are all bas relief, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering about whether this is connected in some way to your reading of the Cantos in Purgatory, where we are shown, Dante shows us the divine art, and it is, first of all, in the form of bas relief. So I was wondering whether there is any connection with your choice of bas relief for the statues, and how you read, or what were your reactions to those bas reliefs that are in Purgatory 10 and 11.
That's very interesting. And you can imagine my surprise when I was designing those. Oh, yes. But really the idea of reliefs for me, there was a practical way, a practical point was, in order to give an equal balance to all of them, I had to keep them in that, and essentially it's kind of the same format. Also, relief sculpture, it's almost like you can create these worlds where you can put perspective, you can put so much in. I don't think, but it's like sculpture and painting combined. And so that gave me the perfect canvas, the sculptural canvas to work these on. Also, the format of them is, well, you can see with the some of the photos I show, they're a page type format. Also, they kind of look like big pages. And I thought that would be consistent with one reading the Divine Comedy too. And so, yeah, and it's the size I did them, like they're about this big or so. And it was the perfect size that I could finish them without putting too much detail in one, and then never moving to the other. And so it's kind of blurry to me how long I spent on it, but it was more than a year, and it was wonderful. But if I would have done them like big 10-foot, like you see the Gates of Hell that Rodin did, that took him 10 years, right? And he would never get done Purgatory or Paradise then. So I wanted to get it done.
Yes, it's a nice reminder that artists deal in the beautiful and the ideal, but they also deal in the practical. And you have to do what you have to do, and that's art. I mean, doesn't art, ars in Latin means the fitting of something to something else, and you have to fit that practicality with the ideal that one has, and then one ends up with beauty. So please join me in thanking Timothy Schmalz for being with us this evening. The Sistine Chapel ceiling. Yes, well, when we first walked in, Tim said, well, now you need to get the Vision of the Last Judgment. So we need to work on that, I guess. But yes, it's beautiful to be in this particular room and talking about beautiful art. So I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I also want to thank our people on Zoom for joining us as well. I want to thank our people who are part of the Fordham Reads Dante world. Those of you who may not know or just learned about the program, you're always invited to our events. If you are interested, you can just write us at cax@fordham.edu, or you can write to me or to Professor Barcella. I want to thank my colleagues at the Kern Center, especially Maria Terzulli, who's sitting in the back, who did so much work to help make this possible this evening. I want to thank the deans of Fordham College and Lincoln Center, who also support our programming, this particular program, this particular lecture, and Fordham Reads Dante. I definitely want to thank our speaker for coming all the way from Canada to be with us this evening. So thank you so much.
Yep. Sure, I got some little postcards that I can give to everyone.
Oh, there are questions if you want to come up and say hello.
That's easy.
Thank you so much.
I have just a photograph on each side. There. There's a little postcard. Oh, thanks. Yeah, there's a website on there that has all the cantos on, so you can take a look at them. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It was just awesome, like to actually get so involved in the divine comedy, and for me, I'm a sculptor, so I thought it was right done in the work, and all divine comedy. So, yeah.